Welcome to the Mission Shaped podcast. My name's Mark Robinson and I'm on the ops team at Fresh Expressions. Today, I'm chatting with Ollie Preston. Good afternoon, Ollie. Welcome to the Mission Shaped podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Good to be here.
Good stuff. Thanks for coming on. So, Ollie, I realise you and I have never met. I quite enjoy these conversations when I meet someone new and I have no idea about their story. And you came recommended. I can't even remember now because of where we're having quite a few episodes. I just get a recommendation. We reach out, and some people come back, and some people don't. You came back to us. So why don't we get into this? Why don't you start telling me a little bit about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And the community that you're involved in, or the community that you're forming, or whatever appropriate. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. So hi, I'm Reverend Ollie Preston. I'm a Church of England vicar. I am married. We've got two children, 10 and 6. I am currently the vicar of Haworth and Crossroads with Stanbury, which is in West Yorkshire, just outside Bradford. It is the Bronte Haworth, that church. So that's been kind of a really interesting new step on my journey, because I am kind of in a fairly trad Church of England parish, and looking to do parish ministry well, but where I would certainly say I am a pioneer. My previous role was outright pioneering, where that's a really important part of what I understand my vocation and who God's made me to be. And so the community that I'm leading at the moment is 3 quite traditional church congregations, but also with a specific remit to be looking for new direction, looking for the new opportunities, and to be re-engaging in a way that hasn't been, particularly maybe for a few years, looking at how we might connect with younger generations, which at the moment is anyone under 60. And kind of find church life out in the community, in the villages, as much as within the 4 walls. So it's a really interesting time. I've been here for a year now.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine that's quite a transition. So me and my wife are also sort of from an Anglican background. My wife is a curate, doing her final year of curacy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I hear when you say trad churches and traditional church models and all that sort of stuff. That must be quite a challenge as a pioneer in some ways, because I know certainly for some people, being a pioneer, but then entering into just sort of a regular parish model is like, that's not what we signed up for in some ways.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how that's happened and sort of what your journey's been like along the way.
So I think it would be fair to say over the last year that there have been times when I have shocked and taken the existing congregations by surprise. Sometimes that's been really positive. Some people have found it a real breath of fresh air and are really excited. Some people have found it really unsettling. And I think perhaps even after the first few weeks, they realise, this is not the vicar you were looking for, or it's certainly not the vicar they expected. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge actually that I see a lot in the wider church, that there is a recognition generally that things can't really carry on as they have been, but there's a reluctance, it's very unsettling to change anything. And for me, that's been hard coming in. I didn't train as a pioneer specific. I was in a kind of straightforward curacy, but I've always had that strong leaning, and to come in and then pick up incumbent level responsibility and be dealing with paperwork and admin about churchyards, when what I want to be doing is sitting in the pub and engaging with the people there, and kind of writing rotas and holding together midweek communions. But I think the exciting thing has been trying to keep my eyes up and be looking for where are the opportunities for the new thing within this model. And so one of the most exciting things that we've done since I started was we've started a Compline service, so this kind of really ancient night prayer. So in some ways, are very, very traditional. And did that a couple of times during Advent as a bit of a kind of an extra thing, kind of in preparation for Christmas. It was well received, and so I've continued that once a week on a Thursday night. And in the last couple of months, that's gone from kind of the faithful few, 5 or 6, and been something that we've managed to advertise on social media a little bit locally. We've put an A-frame board out at the front. The church is right onto Main Street, and we've had people from the village, people who are tourists, come in and just come and find this 20-minute space where we're going through a very traditional thing, but it's something that feels very contemporary, kind of having space and silence, and something that's quite hands-off. There's very low commitment, but where there's an invitation always to go further in. And we've recently started then going to one of the many local pubs afterwards for a conversation that's been really well received. And there's kind of, I guess, with my pioneer eye on, I'm saying this is not just a midweek prayer service, that like this could be a new worshiping community. There's something happening here where there's more than just doing the thing. It's not maintenance, but this is a real mission opportunity, but still kind of within that frame. So it's tension at times, but it's good.
It's really exciting, actually, because it's we hear that, we've heard that several times before, especially in the Church of England, where going back to some of the really traditional models of church, there's actually a hunger for it. And I think we sort of, where there's a real push for charismatic evangelical churches and what a successful church looks like. You think of the big charismatic evangelical churches that have hundreds of people coming in, have multiple church services in a week or even on a Sunday, and that being success. But actually, there's this what feels like a gentle trickle that's developing into something a bit more of people really appreciating liturgy and the ancient way of doing things, exactly as you're describing, which is exciting. Because again, for me, my background is one, I grew up a Catholic, and the idea of liturgy is knee-jerk awful. But over the last few years, with my wife going through training, it's appreciation for that has grown.
Yeah, and so I grew up in a Baptist church, and so certainly the church I grew up in, and probably until I was in my mid-20s, I would have said liturgy is not really praying, because it's, where's the meaning? You're just saying the words. And I think that can be true. I think there can be kind of just going through the motions with it. But I think that's only when you look at a very shallow level. I think the gift that I'm finding is it gives people a really easy in, because they're not having to come and kind of bare their souls, but they can still bring that soul space and engage with, look, here's something that has some structure, just say these words. And at the moment, they can kind of mean whatever you need them to mean, and we can work that out as we go. And so it allows people to come and do that belonging before they necessarily have worked out what they believe, but they can come and be part of it and fully engage. We're all doing the same thing. And I totally agree. I think there's a rediscovering for some of that rootedness. I think this is where pioneering perhaps sometimes is looking back in our traditions, and not kind of in a very broad way, and saying, where are the gems in the heritage of faith that we carry, and how can we kind of bring those out to the fore and offer those to a world of people where people often are wanting some structure and some stability. They're wanting to find something that's been tried and tested, because our world is so chaotic and crazy. Actually, just something where I can sit still, and people have done this for however many centuries, and found it feeds their soul. And how can I tap into that? I don't know if you come across, there's a great new book I'm working through by Elizabeth Oldfield called Fully Alive. And she's done this looking at the 7 deadly sins, and kind of, she says, I didn't expect to write about 7 deadly sins, but I wanted to write about what are the riches of the Christian tradition, and how they can be wisdom for feeding my soul in turbulent times, and finding that consistency, that safe space. And I think we've got some real gems. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes, dust it off a bit, it'd be fine.
I think there's probably a challenge. I think there is a deep challenge in that for those who might typically identify as people that part of the fresh expressions movement. Forgive me, anyone listening, if you're spitting at me in disgust about as I say that. But I think what I'm drawing out from that is a little bit of, sometimes there can be this idea in pioneering and within the movement of, we're trying to do new things, and we're about creating these new Christian communities and doing it in a way that's identifying where God is moving, where the Spirit is moving in a place. And I think sometimes there's a blind spot there to saying, actually, all of these ancient ways has been tried and tested. It's all old stuff and it's all old hat. But actually, the way you're phrasing it there's the reliance on these ancient traditions, the tried and tested methodology, which works and did work. And even for some where it didn't work, applying the culture that we have now and the knowledge we have now to those ancient methods, there's some really interesting, for me, there's some interesting vibes coming from it, at least.
Yeah. I guess interesting because you've instinctively used the word vibes there, because we're talking about that kind of, where do we find this resonance? And some of the challenges, how do we find language that helps people to see that this might connect with where they're at? And are we willing sometimes to engage as kind of interpreters across linguistic barriers, and sometimes be willing to, so we experimented when we started doing Compline. We didn't call it Compline, call it quiet space. And trying to find, how do I describe to someone who has never heard or seen this word before, Compline, is a variation of some Latin thing that means completion, that we're gone, I've already lost you. And so how can I articulate to someone, this is about resonance and soul space and peace, and what are the words that help the people out who are interested in looking and are having these spiritual conversations in a whole lot of other contexts as well already, to see that church maybe isn't what you thought it was. And how am I prepared to take those things and maybe do them in a way or in a context where it's not how it would have traditionally been done here in this place, in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, language is a thing that we in the operations team constantly jostle and talk about, because we realize when something is a thing and when it isn't a thing, and sometimes the language is a few adjectives away from something very, very different.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're guilty of getting too intense about it and focusing too much on the language, rather than just stepping back and saying, okay, what do we recognize? And yes, so this group of people might call this X, and we call this Y, and they call it, I don't know, banana bread. But the point is, there are these common things that we're just trying to find the common ground.
Yeah.
And in that, I think there's also our misunderstandings of it. I was just remembering listening to Rob Bell's podcast.
Okay.
And at one point there was this part in an episode where he was talking about his friends who were atheists, and how he started talking to this group of people that he hadn't really spoken to about his faith in a while. And he did it in his usual kind of Rob Bell flair of just approaching something at a very, very different angle.
Yeah.
But the point of it was that he found that they had more in common with each other and what they thought about faith than what they thought they didn't realize.
Yeah.
So when they started to think about Jesus and the character of Jesus, so whether these friends of his thought Jesus was God or not wasn't the point, but it was the philosophy and this stuff, the common points. And that's where the in was actually, hey, this is the common ground. Let's develop this a little bit. And now I realize sometimes in pioneering circles, we open this up to it sort of being spiritual, and we there's a risk of losing our Christology about it, which that's what I think. Yes, we need to be careful of doing that. But there's a line there, right, of weaving these messages through and saying, actually, it is all about Jesus. We might just be using different language, and that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there's something there about being willing to let go of some control, that I don't need to define the conversation. I don't need to kind of draw a clear line around, we're not, well, no, that perspective is not welcome here. But to be, and it can be difficult. There's been times, one of the most fruitful places I've found for ministry has been in the pub. I think it's a really interesting third space. It's one of the few places where people will go and will just join in and have conversations flow. And where sometimes you can, particularly once people have had a drink, but where people will open up about really big things, but you can end up in some weird conversations. And it's having the strength to kind of stand firm and be me and be honestly me, and continue to bring my honest faith, which sometimes includes my questions and my doubts, and not just kind of give party line, because people see through that. But also be prepared to genuinely engage with hearing and listening to and being open to someone else's perspective, and kind of being the guest at the table rather than always the one who's defining the boundaries. And it makes it a much grayer space, a much weirder space. It's the pioneering space, and it's going out into the uncharted and being prepared to kind of sit and feel uncomfortable. But to then be vulnerable in that space, I think it's really powerful.
It's authenticity, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I think sometimes we've lost that authenticity when you get something that's super polished, super well run, has no rough edges. It loses its authenticity. And there is an authenticity when we go back to ancient styles of worship. Really simple. It's just sitting, reading, listening.
Yeah,
that's it. And then again, going somewhere to discuss, and like you said, being the guest, which is such an important part of being part of a community, is being a guest, being vulnerable, showing that you don't know all the answers, but we're all on this journey of discovery, of discovering more about Jesus, more about how the Spirit moves, more about the gracious God that we live with. And it's really exciting, but it's super challenging. I think especially for those who hanker towards a more established church model.
Yep. It is, because having said it's challenging for me to go and do that, it's been challenging for the congregation, actually, as you say. I think sometimes those who would naturally find themselves moving towards kind of formal liturgical tradition, actually kind of coming and they're just being very clear, very set lines. People often, I've been trying to get some small group stuff going with those who have been part of congregations for a while. One person said, I don't think we do anything particularly radical. We were doing something using the doxicology stuff. It was great, just a very simple Bible study. And this person said, I've been in church for most of my life, and no one's ever had a conversation with me like this. And you think, some of our very traditional church stuff, it's been, I don't know whether there's something about generation shifts, about I'm bringing an expectation that discipleship is something that's alive and active, and I am growing and learning and exploring. And I don't think that's always necessarily been there. There's been the few who go off to train, and the rest of us sit and listen. And I think raising that expectation that this is something we are all doing together is really raising the bar for a lot of people. And I've been finding I've got to be quite gentle with that and give some space and almost be ready to have the same gracious and curious approach within my church congregation as when I'm engaging with those without. Because for some people, actually, the congregation regularly has been a safe space where maybe they haven't had to think too much about what particularly they believe or how this works out. And I'm now saying, oh, come on, guys, let's go and share our faith with other people. And they go, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. No, I'm not ready for that. I just want to come and sing a couple of hymns and kind of may half listen to a sermon. That's what I bought into. So it's having to be gentle and curious and have a lot of empathy with everyone. So
I'm remembering hearing story after story of the years I've been a Christian, of Christian leaders talking about those challenges of remembering that. This is a mass generalization, but our job in a way is to introduce people, start a conversation. Our job is not to our job is not to change people. Our job is not to force people to do something. It's purely an introduction, and it's the Spirit.
Yeah.
A Spirit that engages with people at whatever level they are at. And there's always that thing of God will always engage with people wherever they're at, whether they are deeply academic in their theology or whether they have never experienced anything.
Yeah.
And that's tricky. And I realize for church leaders as well, that's a challenge because, again, there's a risk that if for example, in your case, a conversation down the pub, like you were talking about, you end up talking about weird stuff, some would be really worried about that, saying, well, who's controlling this conversation? Who's directing this conversation? And actually, I'm pretty sure those 12 guys who started the church 2,000 odd years ago probably had some weird conversations with people.
I'm sure they did. I think they had weird conversations with each other. I think you're right. It's for me, it's been kind of having to work on, work on my own trust of God. Do I trust God enough that I'm prepared to step into this and see what happens and trust that God is at work? And there's something about the humility of I've got 1,000 ideas before we've had breakfast, and they're all brilliant ideas. They're not, but am I prepared to say, actually, you know what? No matter how good the thing that I think we could do, we try that event, and why don't we start doing this thing in the garden? And actually, if it's not where God's at, then I'm going to be working real hard for very little payoff, and I can probably make something happen, but that's not wise, and it's not healthy, and it's going to lead to me being very worn out and me being quite manipulative. Whereas if I'm prepared to sit back and trust, and I think actually that's the Jesus I know. He's the one who's out seeking, and he's out having those conversations, and he's prepared to sometimes sit and engage with someone who doesn't quite get it or is maybe not that bothered. And sometimes they'll be really interested and they'll stay, and sometimes they'll wander off, and he doesn't seem troubled by that. And so to learn, actually, maybe I need to have a bit more trust in him and go with his way rather than trying to have it my way.
Yeah. Again, a common thread that we hear from lots of people talking about, being pioneers. And I think sometimes pioneers experience this flip-flopping between these stages of like, I've got all these great ideas, I'm going to go out and do them, and then some of them work and some of them don't, and trying to fight the discouragement of that because and find fight the discouragement, but also find the encouragement in it, because I think God is always working in us. We are only human. Jesus was the only human who was also God. So we can't be expected to get it right every time, but being brave enough to try something that we think we might hear God saying, but be humble enough to realize that actually we might be wrong, and that's okay too. So it's okay, because I think I imagine I sometimes have an image of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God's all sat around the coffee table just laughing at us as we're doing stuff, going like
every day.
This is funny.
But it's for me been about then learning to define, and this for me has been a deep kind of almost like a psychological challenge, like learning to define success as trying and having. So faithfulness is not look at my wonderful, hundreds of people, and I've turned around the parish finances and all of this. But success is that I've tried, I've engaged, I've been alert to where the Spirit's leading, I've been present with this other person, and I'm trusting God, and I'm kind of holding my eyes on Jesus, and that is success. And I guess the elephant in the room is I'm here in a stipendiary post. And the system, the structure of the Church of England needs success to look like at some point people actually regularly attending, people committing to giving, and so there is tension in the system there. That if God is not here to renew the congregations in the church that I'm part of, there's going to be some difficult questions we have to have. And I guess that's where pioneers, I think, maybe find themselves in in that action point, because I think it's felt like pioneers can sometimes be watched more closely, and monitored very closely, and it can be very, very uncomfortable. And when you're being asked for numbers, that makes that a metric of success. You're being asked for what's the giving from your new worshipping community, then money becomes the metric of success. And I don't think it is. I don't think that's intended necessarily, but it can make it very hard not to have your eyes on that, rather than on where's God at work and how do I follow.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges for anyone working in, not just the Church of England. I think any of the main denominations. There is accountability, and we can't get away from that. There is always going to be accountability, and indeed there should be accountability. There's nothing wrong, but there's often the challenge where those metrics don't necessarily align with the style of worshipping community that you're engaging in. And indeed, that's harder when it's obvious, at least to you or to whoever's leading that community, that the Spirit is moving in a certain way, knowing full well that that's not necessarily going to produce the corporate results that the higher ups might need. But then I always find that's really, really, it's tricky, yes, but it's really good when people just do it anyway. God's doing this, so I'm going to keep doing it.
And I think it's where stuff like this, and when I'm chatting with other clergy colleagues, and when I've gone for my review of my bishop, actually not just coming and I've got a fantastic bishop and an archdeacon, they're very supportive and really encouraging, but it's to be able to not just think, well, the only metric isn't the numbers I fill in at the form at the end of the year, but like, what's the stories that are coming through, and to be able to hold those for myself as well. And when I'm praying, I'm not just going, oh Lord, grow some numbers, but I'm praying for individual people. And it's thinking, what would it look like for Jesus to meet this person where they're at? What would it look like for them to kind of discover something of the kingdom, and for their life to be turned around by that? And I'm seeing that, and it's amazing. And the best thing is that the best times it's happening, nothing to do with me. I've had a wonderful run in the last few months. I don't think we've had more than about 4 or 6 weeks since March where there hasn't been at least one person get in touch through the church website, or just turn up or email me and say, I want to explore faith. Or one guy said, I've decided I'd like to be baptized. Someone came along to Compline and said, just feeling a bit lost. I really need something in here. And there's God at work. And I've not done anything for it. Hallelujah.
I think the acknowledgement is the acknowledgement is with our denominations is yes, it's both and. It's yes, there's the structures at bay that govern everything, and that we have to adhere to. Fine. Get that, but also the Spirit moves in ways that we cannot possibly imagine, because we are us, and God is God, and as long as there's some space for that, then I think we're going to be okay. But a lot of these things where we have to acknowledge as well, these are ancient institutions that take a long time to change in any way, and that's okay too. That has its perks, but it also has its frustrations. But the likelihood of some communities being recognized as success, it might take several generations. And that's one thing that I like to go back to, is sometimes you hear about revival, and people talking about revival and hungering for revival. And sometimes it's already happening. It's just on a much smaller scale than you're expecting. Or it's just the seed. And it might be in 200 years' time that there's a history story of this community over here that was like a massive starting point of revival for that region of that place.
Absolutely. That's where the mixed ecology metaphor, I think, that language feels like it's becoming more common, and I think it feels a much a much healthier way of looking at this. That a healthy mixed ecology has got different ages and stages and heights, and some of the healthy mixed ecology is just the seed bank in the earth of like, who knows when this might sprout, but at some point something else will fall down and the conditions will be right. And so then how do I foster and nurture a mixed ecology, which will include some of these great grand old congregations which have been here forever, but also it's got space for this new thing where who knows, but it's there.
Exciting. I always ask people about acknowledging, like we've talked about some of the challenges that you experience, and we've talked about what it is sort of you're doing and what you're feeling out in this sort of way of doing Anglicanism, but stretching it and pushing it and seeing what's there. I always see with pioneers that when you're on the forefront of this stuff, when you're on the leading edge of this, those challenges can sometimes have a cost. So how do you keep well? How do you keep well, both spiritually, mentally, physically, spiritually, all of that stuff, and what networks do you have around you that help you keep going in those moments where you're like literally wanting to throw stuff at the wall, if you ever want to throw it?
No, I've been there. So a big shift for me from my previous post was going from being part of quite a large team with kind of paid staff and full-time volunteers and several clergy to being, I'm the only paid person now, and that's taken some real adjustment. And so in the last year, I've been really actively looking at thinking, who are my team and how am I investing in team, and needing to identify not just the people who are going to do tasks, but who's going to be on this journey with me, and who can I chew things through, who's going to ask me the difficult questions, and who's going to be looking out for me as much as I'm looking out for them. And so on Saturday this week, I'm going to be, one of my new church wardens, who's amazing, has said to me, he's been reading the church warden's rule book, and he says, one of the things is that the church warden's supposed to look after their vicar and make sure their vicar's all right. So I think every 6 weeks we should do a super Sabbath, and we'll either go, we're both surfers, so we'll go to the coast, we'll find some surf, or we'll go for a really long walk, because part of my job is to look after you. And having those people who are going to be watching out for me, it's been really important. That was really special. And so that's kind of locally, and I've recently been re-engaging with a bunch of the people who I trained with, who we had a very close time when we were at college together. One of the gifts of kind of residential training, and now we're all scattered like seeds over the country. But saying actually we can do video call, and we realizing I need to lean back into that. These people who are in for the long term, and who I've known now for years, and who know enough of the kind of context that we're all in, that I don't need to give a big long explanation, but we can, I say, this thing, and we're praying for each other, and just to be able to shout at the wall, but in a way that it's not going to damage things in the parish, because it's someone who's a safe place for that. And I think you're right about kind of naming the physical stuff. And for me, it's really important. It's become really important to recognize that kind of my holistic self, and that if my physical well-being is not good, then I'm not going to do well spiritually either. I can't pray when I'm hungry, or not particularly well. And so finding what are the physical rhythms, and actually going for some discipline, which again, kind of the pioneer in me bristles against. But I've got a little book of some Celtic daily prayer stuff, beautiful, simple Celtic benediction, I think it's called, just to do that thing. And recently I've found even actually I need to find the place in my house where I go and do that thing, because there's too much temptation in me to be like always buzzing around, thrown around. But actually I can't be healthy and consistent if I don't have those fixed points of just, I know what life looks like for these 10 minutes a day, and then go and buzz around like a fly. But finding those, the physical exercise, not letting myself be tempted to work every evening. That's when people are around. I want to constantly go and do it. And thankfully, my wife has been very good at helping me to be disciplined.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I think it's been a whole thing for me. Cold water is good. I like a bit of cold water dipping. It's good. You should try it.
So I'm just going to interject briefly. I did try it once last week when we were in Ireland for the first time in 10 years.
It was great.
With my daughter. And no, but I fully appreciate that if it's your thing, you go for it.
It's my thing, and I do. And that for me has been kind of a prayerfulness as well as a kind of physical discipline, and I guess the challenge there is because it's something I enjoy, not to put it off because it's a nice thing, but say no, the fact that I enjoy it doesn't make it not an important rhythm. And I think there's something there again, kind of, I guess, casting back in the conversation to that sense of I have to be always working harder and striving, and no, it's all right. I can sit back and trust, and I can do the things that are good for me because God wants me to do those things too. So challenging.
Yeah. And it's true, and I'm going to name this thing without necessarily going too much into it because we're nearly out of time. But it's there's so many church leaders in, I think, our Western culture that are workaholics and wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And when you step back and you look at it, it's actually bonkers. It's ridiculous because as well, I meet so many church leaders who are worn out and at the end of their rope and are not necessarily, they know they're not doing their best work because they're so tired and run down. And that's a challenge. And there's no one size fits all answer for that, but certainly just being an awareness, having an awareness of self to say, am I working too much? Am I working too hard? And that's something that's live in our family because again, my wife is a Puritan and trying to do all that, and we're in the middle of interregnum as well. So her tendency to work hard is very, very high. But we have 2 9-year-old twins, so we want to get that balance between them getting time, church getting time, and all that stuff. And
we understand the people who we're trying to lead as well. That when we set that culture, we kind of, without meaning to, we say to them, this is what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus, is to be never really available to my family or myself, to be always giving more than I can afford to be out every minute, every hour that God gives, and actually to lose some of the joy of enjoying simplicity. And I think I'm attempting to take seriously again the habit of Sabbath and the practice of Sabbath, not just as a kind of once every 6 weeks, but every week, and say, what does it look like for us to properly Sabbath? Because there's rules given for a reason, and church leaders are the worst ones at keeping them.
So true. It's almost feels ironic then to go into my final and closing question.
Okay.
I always ask this of everyone I always chat to because it's so important. There are people listening to this podcast who will be at various different stages of leading a Christian community. Some of them might have been pioneering for years. Some of them might have been leading Fresh Expressions for years. Some of them might be starting out. Some of them are also hearing this and going like, wow, I never knew it could be like this and that you could do anything. To that plethora of people, what would you say to inspire them to get going, do it again, keep it up, what have you?
Okay. What would I say to inspire? I would say, if we've found something that is good, I've found the thing which gives me hope and meaning and purpose, where I find the kind of the strength to continue and to be the best parent I can be, and the best person I can be. I think I found truth and goodness and life, and if I trust that God who I found is at work, then surely he's at work with other people. And I think the more that I have these conversations and engage with other people in an open and curious way, and being a vicar opens up doors brilliantly. But I kind of think if we're willing to just put ourselves out there a bit, I really think other people are touching the corner of that, or sometimes have had a glimpse and are curious, and that this is something we can share and find goodness and hope. I don't think we need to strive. I think chill out. You can't force it, and so let's stop trying. But if we're willing to be available and to have a go, and the worst thing that can happen if we have a go is that thing doesn't work. But what's the problem? So I think let's have a go. Fail forward.
Fail forward.
Fail forward.
Brilliant. On that note, I think we need to wrap this up. This has been a really great conversation. We kind of went down lots of different rabbit holes, which was great. I didn't really refer to my usual questions in the same way, which is brilliant. But you've shared some real wisdom and some real authentic experiences that I think certainly, at least for me, I found challenging. And I'm sure some of our listeners will have found challenging too. So, Ollie, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Brilliant. Ollie, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks for joining us, and who knows, maybe we'll speak again sometime soon.
Maybe. See ya.
Take care. Thanks for listening, and we really hope that you join us next time. If you want to connect with us, you can do so via our socials and through our main website. All of that is on freshexpressions.org.uk. And finally, if you've been inspired by what you've heard today, but you're unsure of where to start, Godsend is our amazing toolkit for creating new Christian communities. So visit godsend.cloud. Take care.